How are we doing, Jane?
Yeah, good.
That's good to hear. So what we're doing is getting a bit of an understanding about each of the presidential candidates beyond what we heard at you guys at the debate. So I guess if you want to start by introducing yourself, who you're running with, and a bit about your experience at university.
Right, yeah. Sorry, I'll say
Oh, good. No stress. So if you just want to give us a bit of a understanding of your experience at university, what you're studying, and who you're running with this year.
Right. Okay, so I'm Jade. I study history. I'm running with Left Action. I first got involved with Left Action in my first year of uni at 2016 because I'd heard about the awful staff cuts, like the 330 cuts to staff, and the renewal project, the merging of 9 faculties into just 4. And the only people who seemed to give a shit about that was the activists in Left Action. Like, people in STAR just kind of said, this has gone through, there's nothing you can do about it, so you should just accept it and move on. Well, people in Left Action were like, no, we can take a stand and we can actually change things. So that's when I first ran in the elections, I guess, yeah.
Right. And are you, just by way of disclosure, because we're asking all the candidates, are you a member of any political party or any political faction?
I'm part of Socialist Alternative, which isn't a party, it's more an organisation.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I guess what really brought you to this position to actually want to run for Guild President? What has your experience with the Guild be? Do you want to sort of walk us through what that engagement has been that has sort of led you to be like, I want to run for Guild President?
Yeah, well, as I said, got involved with Left Action in 2016, and I've been on Guild Council this year, and it's been like, I think it reveals a lot about the kind of wannabe politicians who run our guild. Like, STAR claim to be progressive when they're really not. Like, they'll go along with whatever, well, a lot of what the Liberals say. So, for example, when I tried to move a motion around Books Not Bombs, they fell into the right-wing argument that this would be an attack on science students or whatever, which it really isn't. And they're much more obsessed with just, using their titles to boost their egos. They're like obsessed with running the bureaucracy rather than wanting to use it to actually fight for students' rights. So I thought it was important that we actually had activists on the council who wanted to use the guild for the greater good, I guess.
I mean, I assume STAR would probably defend their sort of left-wing progressive record throughout the year. I guess if you want to, apart from Books Not Bombs, where do you see STAR have not fulfilled that sort of mantra that they speak to, that they're this progressive party on campus?
Yeah, well, I feel like they can kind of look progressive on paper. Like when they've kind of voted for motions like opposing Australia Day, like recognising that it's actually Invasion Day, which is good. Voting for my motions that are supporting refugee rights and stuff like that, which is, it's good on paper, but they don't actually translate those solidarity motions into actions or something concrete. Like, the Guild has like immense resources. It has networks. It has, all student emails. It has connections with the clubs. Like, it could mobilise a lot of people to actually come to these protests, which could make a real difference. Like the protests against deaths in custody, against mandatory detention, but they don't do that. And I think you kind of get a sense, like when we did have that rally against Van Meter because he's a transphobe. Like the Guild got involved with that, and it mobilised a significant amount of people to that protest. So you can kind of see the potential of the Guild, but STAR isn't using it for that reason.
Absolutely.
I guess, yeah, touching on that and what we've asked some of the other candidates for Left Action is around the role of Left Action in this election, not seeing much wanting to see much success in like the OB positions, but rather just getting representation. Why do you think, given that you act as an activist body already and work against the system in some regards, what is it about being part of the Guild that is so necessary for you guys as a movement?
Well, I think it's kind of pose an alternative idea of how the Guild could be run, and kind of using that platform to popularise left-wing politics rather than just, letting students having to deal with the fact that the Guild is run by essentially 2 very similar tickets that like really aren't going to stand up for their rights. It's about posing an alternative idea, because the Guild can be used, like I've said, for some very positive things. There have been histories of guilds in Australia, campaigning against the Vietnam War, getting involved in land rights for Aboriginal people, fighting for marriage equality and LGBTI rights. It's posing an alternative to say this is what our guild could be doing, but it's not, and that's why you should oppose it.
I mean, you guys are openly left wing. I guess, like, in terms of a guild that obviously seeks to represent all students while also recognizing that it can't represent all students simultaneously, how do you manage that sort of tension between you guys as an openly left wing faction and plenty of students out there who might be just centred, and some of them might be hard right, and I'm sure you kind of discount those views, but people who are just in the centre who don't really see the guild as an activist left-wing body, who just see it as something that can help them out, give them cheaper food, things like that. What do you sort of say to those students about the role of the guild that you see it having?
Well, I guess it's trying to say that we need to get involved in political issues. Like, sure, it might be fine for you as a centrist to just use the guild as like a service provider, but that's not okay for, you know, poor people, for oppressed people who actually need support. Like, they need the resources of the guild, the financial support. It is like a necessity for them, so you can't just like sit by and ignore that.
So touching on that, we were speaking earlier about some of the potential policies that have been pushed forward by Left Action in the past, things like $4 meals as a way to increase accessibility for those people, marginalised people you talk about. Do you see this year anything that Left Action could work towards that is quite tangible, that voters might get around and coalesce to try and give you the support that you guys probably want in the election?
I mean, we don't really tend to focus on like very specific policies because, like, we're not going to get the OB positions.
Yeah.
But of course, we try to implement welfare policies like the $4 meal, and then, but also try to push the guild to fight for better welfare in general. Like, it's good that the guild at UWA is, if it did implement $4 meals and things like that, but it's also, you have to understand the national context, which is a continuous kind of eroding of welfare for students that, you know, makes it impossible for them to buy good meals in the first place, so you have to kind of address it on a national level.
Yeah, I mean, kind of touching specifically on those sort of policies, I mean, if you're abandoning kind of those more the day-to-day stuff, even on the big ticket issues, for instance, like 12-week semesters, that's one area where you guys have been quite critical of STAR's action or lack thereof on it. Do you guys think this is something that you can actually stop? Is it a matter of STAR not having been effective enough, or is it just a matter that the guild itself is not a powerful enough body to stop the university from making these decisions? Is that something that can be changed at all?
Yeah, well, I think it can, but it can't when STAR's tactics was like the runners of the guild, the prominent ones, because their tactic was, you know, we're not going to talk about it for 2 years, then we're going to make this shitty little video with just like Conrad and Megan, and then an online petition, which really doesn't get that many students involved on the ground. So I think if the guild was actually full of activists, we could actually run a successful campaign, which involves throwing light on how awful the conditions at UWA are in like a very public way. And this is what kind of puts doubt on the reputation of UWA, and that's what can force the admin to reconsider.
So you kind of look at the sort of the campaign that took place around the Australian Family Association event, that sort of shaming really forced UWA into some sort of action. Is that the kind of thing you want to replicate? That sort of public shame kind of status? Yeah. Yeah,
because pretty much what UWA cares about the most is its reputation, because that's how it draws in, you know, more students who will then pay money.
Yeah, the bottom line as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so they don't really care if somebody's loving them, if it's like 1 or 2 students telling them they're unhappy. Like, the uni doesn't give a shit. Like, it only cares when its whole reputation is in disrepute.
Yeah, I guess touching on that then, do you think that's a sustainable way to approach a lot of different areas? Because I think most students can acknowledge that UWA is far from perfect. There are many areas that it fails on. I guess, how do you, from that perspective, prioritise which issues are ones that you would dedicate into a real activist approach, and which issues do you think, if there are any, that you would approach from a different perspective or take a different tact, or is it just pure activism is the only way to solve these problems?
I think it is really. Like, I don't think lobbying really works at all because it's like bodies like the uni admin, like this is a material decision, like they've calculated this. They're a very powerful and rich body. They're not just gonna roll over because someone tells them they're unhappy. It's about putting actual pressure on them that they can't ignore.
Okay, and then I guess touching on that, given that obviously we all know that elections are low in voter turnout, there isn't as much engagement. How do you think you could activate what you presume are like unactivated activists, I guess, people that are like don't involve themselves in the political process but could get behind your process? How do you get them interested and engaged to try and create the critical mass that would necessitate the changes you would like?
Yeah, well, I guess there's kind of a limit to it in the current political kind of climate that we live in, where people are very demoralised, they feel very alienated, they're told their entire lives that, you know, they can't really change anything, they have to rely on the powers that be. Part of running in the elections is, you know, using that platform to say, no, you can get involved in campaigns with people like Left Action or whatever. And that can kind of be hard to get in, like, sorry, I don't know where I go with this. The current state of the guild politics is very uninspiring. Like, students don't see a way to get involved. It's like nobody wants to go to the council meetings because they're like incredibly mundane. There's no kind of big kind of general mass meetings. I think like if Left Action were to run the guild, that we would have, so students could kind of give their feedback. We can everybody can kind of vote on what the guild policies would be. It wouldn't just be this tiny elite.
One thing I wanted to ask about is a lot of these issues seem very, very correlated with sort of the broader state of Australian national politics, right? UWA has a growing international student population, a rapidly growing international student population. What does Left Action have to offer people who are here, who potentially want to move to Australia, or people who are just here for a year? What is it that you guys can do for their uni experience in the short term that is valuable, that they should vote? Because they're an increasing demographic that I think is worth asking about. What's sort of Left Action policy there?
Yeah, so on international.
On international students.
Yeah.
Policy, yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of problems that international students face that aren't really addressed by any of the major tiers. One is kind of the wider racism in society that flows onto the campus. So there's been a growth of Islamophobia by the Australian government, I think, and that kind of comes onto UWA. Like a couple of years ago, a pig's head was dropped in the Muslim prayer room toilets, and the guild didn't really respond to that. I think we can, when events like that do happen, it's about, you know, holding rallies and protests that show that we support international students and getting involved in anti-racist campaigns in general. That can kind of show them that, you know, we do support you and these racist ideas are very fringe. The other thing is dealing with the financial problems that international students face. One is the fact that they are charged insane fees by the university up front, which is very, very tough. And I think the most effective way to get rid of that issue is by fighting for free education, and that's for international students as well. And the other big problem is the fact that international students who work are hyper-exploited in their workplaces. Like, think of the 7-Eleven scandal. Like, they're very, very underpaid, often paid just in cash. They find it hard to join their unions without getting sacked. They have very few work rights. They can't speak out at work, again, out of fear for being sacked. So I think what Left Action would argue for is fighting these workplace issues, encouraging international students to join their union and giving them support around those issues as well.
Yeah, so do you think that Left Action as a ticket represents the majority of students at UWA?
I think UWA is a special case. It is a GO8 university. A number of students on the campus, you know, the future ruling class, the sons and daughters of the big business owners and the politicians. So there is that aspect. It is historically a very right-wing campus. So I think that's true, but it's also there are a number of working class students as well who would support our platform, but are just kind of repulsed by the whole guild politics in general, that they kind of just try to keep it at arm's distance and aren't necessarily aware that there's an alternative.
I wanted to move to something that's been one of the more controversial elements of this year's Guild's Council, which was the vote on the whole Dalai Lama motion. Now, kind of parking the actual issue aside, I think what that speaks to is that a lot of the times in Guild Council, people don't really understand what they're voting for. And I guess you kind of clearly want people to vote on these bigger picture issues. You don't see a separation between Guild Council and broader politics. How do we manage that tension where Guild councillors don't necessarily understand all the nuance about these issues? How do we take things like separatism in Tibet and the Dalai Lama or the military-industrial complex to Guild councillors and expect them to vote on those consistently, often, and effectively? Do you see a tension there?
Well, I think it's like, it just comes down to people's principles, really. And I think these issues, while complex, they're not beyond the understanding of guild representatives. I think they can understand it, but they often try to kind of sidestep these issues by either saying it's not relevant or it is too complex for them to understand. So they don't actually have to reveal their right-wing principles.
So on an issue, I mean, were you at the Guild Council meeting where this motion about the Dalai Lama?
No, I wasn't.
Right. Do you have an opinion on it? Because I think, to me, that's something that isn't necessarily a left-wing, right-wing thing. I think it is just a complicated issue. Do you have any thoughts on it?
Well, I think the fact is the whole motion was coming from people who don't support the rights of the Tibetans, which I do. I support the rights of all oppressed minorities, including the Palestinians against Israel and the Tibetans. So I don't think the Dalai Lama should be banned. That being said, I think he is a right-wing figure. He supports slavery, for instance. I don't think the Dalai Lama is a good person at all. But I also don't think the motion was coming from the right place.
I guess the tension that I'm driving at, and I don't want to spend much longer on this, is that where is the line between wanting to sort of represent an oppressed group within Tibetan peoples and also wanting to represent international students on campus who, maybe it's a minority in this case, but maybe in other cases it might not be, who say this is an issue that affects us. Do you see any issues of trying to represent groups consistently who say this is a problem for us and the guild has to respond to that if it's an activist guild? Is there any issues that that's going to bring up? Because it's clearly gone wrong here for the guild.
Well, I think...
You want to explain that a bit better? I guess I'm Irish, for instance. If I was and a group of other Irish students on campus were to say that we were finding some element of the guild's policies offensive or some, how do you manage the interests of those groups and say that this group has a legitimate criticism here versus the group, the Tibetans in this case, that doesn't? Where do you draw that line that says we have to take action on every single issue that gets brought to us?
Well, I think it's more a class issue more than a national issue. Because I think the people who wanted to ban the Dalai Lama come from the Chinese ruling class, and I don't think the ideas that Tibet shouldn't be supported is very right wing. And so I think it's about, again, coming down to what kind of class issues you want to be involved in.
I guess touching similarly on that, but in a different sphere, one you might be more aware about in terms of the Books Not Bomb campaign. You mentioned earlier that you felt that the claim that certain subsets of students disagreed with it was a right-wing claim, or masked a right-wing claim. Often I think that university students can't be homogenised in certain instances, and often the job of representatives, I guess, is to get that consultation. If it were to be found that a subset of students, or quite a large people that are affected directly by a motion, felt in opposition to it, do you think that it is fair for the majority of that council to acknowledge that harm that could be caused?
Well, it depends what harm they're talking about. In the terms of Books Not Bombs, the right-wing students of engineering were saying this is harming us because it's hurting our future career in building weapons, which I don't think that's legitimate at all. What's much more important is the fact that lives are going to be lost overseas if these weapons continue to be built. So I think their claims of being harmed are really just them trying to continue on with their support for awful policies like the militarisation of our universities and conducting wars overseas.
I think that to touch on from our understanding as well is that some of that nuance is about the effect that UWA specifically has on those particular areas of research. So I guess maybe you can speak to what you understand of UWA's involvement in this, but from some discussion, and the reason I presume that Conrad fell in that particular way after consulting with those engineering students was that they felt that it didn't represent the way that UWA was affected, and therefore they didn't want to be a part of a process that could harm other students that they didn't know the experiences of. So I guess, maybe you can talk to that and why you feel that UWA can have a place and a conversation in university politics that doesn't, they can't be a part of directly, if that makes sense.
Sorry, what do you mean?
So, for example, the conversation from my understanding was very much in the Wollongong research, particularly into drones and all that kind of stuff. I was wondering if you think there is a place for UWA to have a conversation when you can't directly apply that pressure onto that university when you aren't a part of that university, and rather attaching yourself to that could have different direct harms, is essentially what I'm getting at.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, there are very concrete links at UWA itself, like the fact that students conduct research with Thales, which is an arms manufacturing company, and the fact that UWA students receive grants from the Defence Department, and also the fact that students are forced to do research into drones in the Navy. And so UWA itself has very concrete links, and this is kind of like it's a campaign that's being run on a number of different campuses, and it's about doing our part, but also taking a principled stand with what students are facing at Wollongong, and seeing it as all part of like a national project to oppose the fact that our government is continually pushing to militarise our borders and push for wars overseas. It's about opposing that that trend in general.
What? On that. I'm pretty much good.
Yeah. The last thing I guess I wanted to ask is we've spoken with a few of your OB candidates, and obviously you've made reference already that you feel that you won't win any of those positions, or even the presidency for that matter. I guess my question is, do you think as a tactical approach from your party, you could still have the same commentary on all these positions that you want, but still run in OGC positions where you may have more electoral success, or are able to put greater pressure on the number of votes that you get, so you do get that representation in the council? I guess I'm curious as to where you guys feel that your party is going in that direction, and whether that was the correct approach.
So can you repeat that?
So given that you've accepted that you don't think you'll have much electoral success in the OB positions, or the presidency for that matter, I guess what we're wondering is the decision to move into that platform just to comment on it, and whether you could still do that without having to be in those particular foot races, and you could still do that while being in an OGC position and pushing for greater representation through that platform.
So why are you running the OB position?
Yeah, basically, we've been told by OB candidates essentially why are you running on food and drink? They're like, well, because we have a say in it. We want to have a say. We don't think we're going to win. Could you still have that say without having to kind of devote resources to that race? Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's about using the platform as much as possible, and we do have opinions on all the different kind of subsets of the OBs, so women's and treasury and welfare and all that. But we don't put down specific policies, but we do have opinions on them, and we can make the argument from that position.
Cool. All right, I guess then what we'll ask to close this out is why should the voter put one next to Jade, or in this case, one next to any Left Action nominee?
Well, they should do it if they want a left-wing alternative, if they want votes towards putting in activists in council who actually use the Guild to fight for their education and for wider social campaigns, rather than just adding to the kind of pyramid schemes of Launch and Star that boost their egos so they can give themselves fancy positions. If they want to have a protest vote against that, then they should vote for Left Action.
All right. Well, thanks for your time, Jade.
Okay.